that we stand for those fundamental principles and values that characterize Europe as we know it. Now it's the time to stand on the right side of the history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kiwela. I now give the floor to Daniel Milewski, Poland.
There are moments in history we call decisive. And this is a decisive moment for the Ukrainians who are fighting for their freedom and the very survival of their nation. It is also a decisive moment for the Russian people, who must decide whether to choose a path of peaceful coexistence and democratic future, or to follow Vladimir Putin to a barren wasteland of isolation, poverty, and enslavement. But it is also a decisive moment for we, Europeans. For too long, too many of us have pretended that we do not see where Russian oligarchs' money originates from. For too long, we have turned a blind eye to the fact that gas and oil can be used as political blackmail. For too long, business as usual attitudes ignored Russian trickery. Our goal must be to advance freedom, peace and prosperity across Europe. If we do not understand this imperative, then we shall all find ourselves in more danger. It is time to show our solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And yes, it is time to sacrifice short-term profit for long-term stability and peace. And then we shall have prosperity. For years, we in Poland have warned that Putin's Russia is not a true partner and cannot be trusted. We were not listened to. We have done our work by reducing our dependence on Russian gas supplies and by not profiting from Russia's money laundering. Now, the free world stands united against Russia's genocidal war. All ties with Russia are being cut, and Putin's dark interests are being exposed. I can only hope and pray that something good will come from these tragic events. As Europeans, we must act now to support Ukraine against this aggression. We must fight for our democratic heritage and the future of our civilization. And remember, the glory and the freedom of Ukraine has not yet perished. Jeszcze nie wmerła Ukrainy, ni sława, ni wolia.
Thank you, Mr. Milewski. I call now Mr. Siconho, Pedro Siconho, Portugal. You have the floor.
What's the point of the war? Why can't people live together peacefully? Why all this destruction? This sentence was written on May the 3rd of 1944 by Anne Frank. It should not be possible for a people of Europe to go again through the horror of war, death and destruction. It should not be possible for a people of Europe to go again through the despair of separated families, lost futures and irreconcilable hatreds. All of us here call for stop the conflict and ask for diplomacy and ethics to prevail. We are also concerned about the world heritage in cities like Kyiv and Odessa. Museums' walls are empty. Cellars are filled with packaged works of art. Saving art is the second priority after saving lives, because heritage is also based on the conviction of a unique cultural identity of Ukraine. That's why we want to remember the courage and the risk that Ukrainian artists, museum directors and technicians are taking to protect the heritage. Heritage that belongs not only to Ukraine, but also to all humanity. For more than 6 years, I worked with the Ukrainian delegation to the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. Today, our thoughts are with those women and men who fight alongside their populations. Today, our thoughts are with those mayors who feed and care for their population, but are attacked, kidnapped, and, who knows, killed. We should also follow the President of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe and support his statement in which he strongly condemned the abduction of the mayors and the pressure on local elected representatives in occupied territories and call for their immediate release. We, the people of Europe, ask to Russia leaders, please give peace a chance. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ciccogno. I call now for Dara Cagliari.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Rapporteur. Thank you for your report, for the extraordinary work you've put into that report. Madam Chair, I welcome the President's clarification that we are proceeding this evening in spite of the Russian announcement that they intend to withdraw from the Council of Europe. They intend to withdraw by using Article 7. They intend to do that to try and stop, to withdraw before we push them. And we must proceed to push them, to expel them, and the Council of Ministers must expel them too, because in expelling them, we defend the values of this organisation, we defend the values of Europe. We defend the very essence of our being as citizens of Europe. What other parliamentary assembly in this world tonight has members who are armed and in a battlefield? What other parliamentary assembly has women of the diplomatic battalion within its ranks who fight politically and fight here with words, with passion and with complete courage and with their daughters? What other parliamentary assembly can point to its members who may not return to the next sitting of this assembly unless we take strong decisions here this evening? As elected representatives, we should stand with the mayors, with the local representatives who have been kidnapped because they are elected representatives. That is the only reason. They are kidnapped because they are one of us. We stand with the pro-democracy movement in Russia who are putting their lives on the line tonight by standing up for the values that we take for granted possibly every single day. And we stand with every single person of the Ukraine. Every single person who tonight does not know what faces them and does not know what faces them tomorrow. But while we stand, Madam Chair, with the people of Ukraine, this is also a moment for this institution to look at itself in the mirror and ask itself some very hard questions too. Were those values, the values that we stand for, compromised by geographical ambition and geographical expansion? And do the Member States compromise those values by geographical ambition, by economic expediency, and by various other compromises that they are making to undermine those values? So tonight, Madam Chair, we send our good wishes to Ukraine. We stand Shasamij le Muidtir Ukraine, Mar Dúirtmid, as we say in Gaelic. But we must ensure that we do not reach this moment again. We must ask ourselves the hard questions too, in this institution, in other European institutions, in Member States. And we must aim to become relevant to the lives of every single citizen of Ukraine, but of every single citizen of Europe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cagliari. And I now call for Mr. Davis, and I think he is online. Is that true? Yeah. Mr. Davis.
Mr. President, Putin's unprovoked barbaric attack on Ukraine is an attack on democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and as such is an attack on the very founding principles that the Council of Europe set up after World War II. And so Russia must be ejected and excluded without delay. The fact that Ukraine was considering joining the EU and NATO to protect its economy, to protect its security, is not a legitimate pretext for Putin to invade a sovereign democracy led by President Zelensky, a Jewish person farcically branded by Putin as a Nazi, when it is Putin himself who has all the hallmarks of a fascist dictator: oppression at home, aggression abroad. Perhaps he wants Ukraine as the second largest country in Europe for its grain, for its uranium, for its gas, to bring pride and wealth to Russia. But instead, he makes a breadbasket into a wasteland, a peaceful nation into a generation of heroes who will smolder, even if temporarily vanquished, until the spark of resistance bursts into the flame of freedom again. And what will it mean for the people of Russia? Not pride and prosperity, but hatred, shame and poverty. Putin, of course, gambles on the West's fear of his hand hovering over the nuclear button, ready to fire. And the world looks on in horror at the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe of the civilian bombardment and 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees. But let's also remember the Russian soldiers thrown on the fire as an expendable fuel on Putin's blood-drenched journey. Surely the Russian people would prefer their own freedom, and they already have enough land. But until there is another Gorbachev figure emerging and Russia reverses the actions, they must be ejected and excluded. Putin only has China to turn to for economic sustenance, and surely they will ultimately want Russian land in exchange, so Russia gains nothing. China wants stability and growth and power, not isolation and chaos and decay, so they won't give permission for the firing of a nuclear weapon, as they understand the consequences of doing so. So we must stand firm by our values, strong in our decisions, and as the next step, ban Russia from our Parliamentary Assembly, only to let them return in the future if their actions are fully reversed and our principles fully honoured.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I give now the floor to Thomas Latos, Poland.
Yes. Madam President, dear colleagues, it must be said clearly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is an act of unprecedented aggression, full of war crimes that are hard to imagine in the 21st century. Russia's aggressive policy of maintaining political control over its neighbors has taken the form of military aggression unprecedented since the Second World War. A full-scale war against a neighboring state is a criminal act that requires not only condemnation, but also a firm response. I call for a strong and united opposition to Russian aggression. Only firmly implemented economic sanctions and harsh measures of diplomatic pressure stand a chance of defusing the crisis. Ukraine deserves economic and material support. This is a testing time for the whole of Europe. The mistakes of the 1930s must not be allowed to be made again. Ukrainian independence is now a common strategic interest of the entire civilized world. Europe must be aware that Putin's policy is not only a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, but also a threat to the security of the whole continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas Latos. I now call for Mrs. Annika Engblom. I see her already. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. For the last 8 years, our Ukrainian, Baltic and Georgian colleagues have warned us about this Assembly for the worsened development of Europe's security that we found ourselves in on its horror today. Me and a half of the Swedish delegation have sided with them, but the majority of this Assembly have chosen to put its trust to the democratic tools of our civilizations, our humanitarian laws, our democratic institutions, which is understandable. Those are the pillars upon our nations has been built, but to which Putin, his regime, and his delegation in PAÍS have been totally indifferent all along. Well, here we are. The decision we will take in a while, and what we do from here will have an impact on the future for the people of Ukraine, for all of us. Madam President, I'm not only parliamentarian, I have a background as an officer in the Royal Swedish Navy and Intelligence Service, and I therefore hold in high esteem the strategic fighting skills, persistence and heroism of the Ukrainian people. But I am also a mother, so I will speak as a mother in Russian.
Mothers of Russia, brave mothers of Russia, you who have spoken out and protested and demanded an end to the war in Afghanistan and the return of your sons. We have all seen and supported and admired your struggle. The time has come again to say what you must say. Your sons are waging an unjust war, an unjustified war, unleashed on you, the Russian people, by your bloodthirsty, cruel regime headed by Putin. An unjustified war which has devastated the neighboring country of Ukraine, your brothers and sisters. Your sons are dying. And now lie among the corpses. And they are being sent to battle in trains from Belarus. Your sons are fighting without even knowing why and for what purpose, and why they are shooting, and why they are killing Ukrainians. As a mother, I appeal to you, from one mother to another mother, be on our side in our battle for freedom and our struggle for life. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you.
Dear Annika, I don't know where you did learn it, the Russian language, but even more respect for you. Thanks very, very much. I give now the floor to Yulia Lovotskina from Ukraine. She's here.
Dear colleagues, having invaded Ukraine, the Russian Federation has unleashed the largest war in Europe since World War II. I know, and my friend Saranda has told us a lot, and everyone who was there were other wars, but this one is the biggest one. We are all witness to a catastrophe on a planetary basis. Let's not underestimate, it's not a continental one, caused by Russian aggression against Ukraine. As a result, large-scale military attacks in almost all regions of Ukraine, a huge number of my fellow citizens are suffering. Thousands of civilians, including women, young children, and infants, have been killed, and many more have been wounded. Ukraine is going through an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Millions of Ukrainian citizens have been forced to become refugees and IDPs. The entire Ukrainian delegation and I fully support the decision to be taken today. The Russian Federation can no longer be a member of the Council of Europe. Every day of war takes lives of my compatriots, primarily civilians. Today, in our Women PASA meetings, we discussed many consequences, how we can help, what to be addressed, what actions is to be taken. We discussed many things, but not like this. Just an hour ago, I received a call from my friend who was in first trimester and lost her child because of the stress everyone is going through. It's just that she was too stressed, she's safe, she's in safe condition, but she's too stressed and she lost her child. So today Ukrainians have one main request: to stop the war and the cruel bloodshed. An immediate ceasefire based on proper negotiations is of vital need. President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly stated that he is ready for that in order to stop killings and destructions. There is an online format of negotiations which gives a little hope. In view of this, I call upon the Assembly and its individual members to stimulate negotiations at all possible levels, at platforms, so we are to stop this horror, this terrifying war, the cruel bloodshed, and the large-scale destruction of Ukrainian cities. In addition, I urge Assembly to call on international community and Council of Europe member states to provide assistance to Ukraine. We need both immediate aid, everything possible, as well as long-term post-war assistance to overcome the consequences of destruction and humanitarian disaster.
Thank you.
Just one last sentence. The war of aggression against Ukraine presents a threat to all Europe. And now it is self-evident that we need a new European security architecture. It is time to embark upon a discussion on its format and possible modalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I give now the floor to Mrs. Yurida Tabaku from Albania.
Dear colleagues, it's always difficult speaking after one of our colleagues from Ukraine, sharing their very powerful stories. Let me start by paying a tribute to the courage of the Ukrainian people and its leaders for their determination to fight for freedom. What we are doing now is a lesson for everyone. Thanks to Maria, Olena, Larissa, Julia, and everyone else who is here with us in this room, but also who are working out of this room. This is my first mandate in the Council of Europe, and I was really touched by the solidarity, unity shown by members here during the last 2 days, but also by the leadership of the rapporteur for the excellent work with the opinion that we have, a very strong political document. We must hold high the freedom and human dignity that the European Convention of Human Rights teaches us for more than 70 years now. This invasion is from one member of the Council to another member of this Council and cannot be acceptable. We have to recall how war has unfolded in Europe 80 years ago. Some of us have very fresh memories of other wars in the Balkans. I am from Albania, and vivid images of the Kosovo wars only 25 years ago are very strong among people in the Western Balkans. Therefore, we have to prepare and to act quickly, not when things are at a stage where decisions as the one that we are taking today should have been taken before. We cannot allow for another precedent to unfold in front of our eyes. We have seen humanitarian, economic and social crises where women, children and everyone else has been under attack. Mariupol images have been shocking for everyone, especially for those who have also children at home. I believe that the territorial integrity, safety of people, providing minimum requirements and living conditions is now an obligation for all of our countries, independently of size. I heard great discussions yesterday and today, and the report voted unanimously shows in the political group shows that this Assembly knows its path. This Assembly will provide also guidance to the Council of Ministers for a final decision for the expulsion of Russia. I believe that asking nicely will not work anymore. What is happening contradicts international law, international standards and principles, and no one can close their eyes. I believe that we should give a strong message also to help with the humanitarian crisis, to ask EU member states to continue with packages for support with Ukrainian people, devote all energies and resources with plans to restore the action plan for democratic reforms in Ukraine, but before all, we must help to stop war. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mrs. Tabakou. Je donne maintenant la parole à Monsieur.
Let me now give the floor to Claude Kern. Thank you very much indeed, President. Dear colleagues, only 2 years after the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, a new conflict has broken out between new members of our organization, a conflict of a magnitude that is shaking up the whole of Europe and that is questioning very directly the values of our organization. I sincerely regret that all diplomatic efforts made to avoid this conflict did not bear fruit. The Russian aggression against Ukraine, which began on the 24th of February, is unacceptable. The Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe decided on the 25th of February to suspend the Russian Federation from its representation rights in the Committee of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. This decision was a first step which was absolutely necessary. It is now clearly insufficient. Even if the path that follows will eventually lead to depriving Russian citizens of their right to seek redress from the European Court of Human Rights, Vladimir Putin leaves us no choice. The suspension of Russian parliamentary powers and Russian attitude since 2014 is enough to convince us of this. Their parliamentary powers being suspended did not lead to any significant progress on the situation in Ukraine, nor did their return to our Assembly in 2019, and nor did this prevent war. It is true that defence and security issues do not fall within the competence of the Council of Europe. This having been said, the preamble to our convention reminds us that the Council of Europe should strengthen links between member states which are deeply wedded to respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, which constitute the very bedrock of justice and peace in the world. These values are not shared today by the Russian Federation, which has repeatedly tested the credibility of our organization. The intensifying bombings aimed directly at the civilian population to frighten them, or the creation of humanitarian corridors leading to Russia or Belarus, show just how cynical the Russian leaders are, who have no regard for the rights of the Ukrainian people. Quite the contrary, Putin and his entourage are behind massacres and real war crimes. What NGOs and journalists are telling us about the situation on the front line is particularly alarming. This conflict is a negation of all the values that the Council of Europe has championed since its creation. And this is why we must react today, both to affirm our solidarity with the Ukrainians and also to recall our attachment to our values. Vladimir Putin's Russia can no longer belong to the Council of Europe. The credibility of our organization depends on it. Just to round off, let me say once again, well done to the Ukrainian people for its bravery and courage, and we'd like to express our full support to them. Slava Ukraina. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kern. And now let me give the floor to Mr. Grimaldi.
You have the floor.
Grazie.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to all of you for this interesting debate which we have all wished to have. And I wish to stress that we need firmness and responsibility and solidarity. I'm one of the few colleagues here who've actually been to the field, as it were, to see with my own eyes what's happening there. I was in Poland and I saw the dramatic humanitarian situation being witnessed there. And as the Council of Europe has to deal with human rights first and foremost, then there is one thing we must really focus on today. It is the situation there. And I heard what the head of the delegation of Ukraine to the OSCE said and what the paramount needs were. And I'm especially wish to pay tribute to Poland, which has taken in hundreds of thousands, over 1 million Ukrainian refugees, and also pay tribute to the other countries, Hungary, Slovakia and others. I wish to say a big thank you to them. And I really felt today that Europe is now penalizing Hungary and Poland in a sort of fantastic utopianism. The very countries are doing everything possible in order to protect these people in this humanitarian tragedy. So I really wonder whether that sort of initiative is appropriate, given that Poland and Hungary need help and not punishment. Furthermore, some of those countries have also been criticized regarding immigration issues. Today, we realize that when real refugees arrive, those countries deserve great thanks and respect. This being said, we now need to move to pragmatic issues. There are issues which have to be dealt with at a very basic level, because the refugees can't change their Ukrainian hryvnias into local currency when they arrive in these countries. These are small things, but we should think about how we can help these people. Today, the German government called on the Poles to deal with the trains coming from Poland. We should, rather than stopping trains with refugees, we should be giving assistance to these peoples. I'm thinking first and foremost of the fact this is on European territory. And I conclude finally by saying that a few days ago, the Cara Larichetti in Germany criticized the Italian government because it was stopping economic refugees. Well, here we're talking about real refugees fleeing the war. And I wonder where that lady now stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Tamar Taliashvili from Georgia.
Dear President, my dear colleagues, I represent Georgia, the people who have suffered from the grave atrocities of the Russian aggressive warfare several times throughout just the recent decades, including an ongoing occupation of the Georgian regions. Our delegation in the Council of Europe, including personally me, together with the Ukrainian colleagues and several other countries, have been extremely vocal at warning that Russia would not abandon its goal of the free Europe conquest. Unfortunately, the aggressor exploited an opportunity to negotiate from the position of continued strength. My dear colleagues, now that Europe faces a full-scale war, where to find the solution? One of the responses is the unity not only within the Council of Europe, through its numerous bodies and institutions, but beyond. Coordinated action among all European institutions is needed to face this threat, and on the other hand, to embrace friends and allies. and strengthen their confidence in European leadership. The survival of European freedom will be determined by whether Europe has the courage to meet this challenge of leadership. Georgia stays committed to the goal of just, fair, and lasting peace in Europe. Georgia was among co-sponsors of the UN's Security Council resolution in Ukraine's support. As well, Georgia co-authored the call for investigation of the Russian war crimes at the International Criminal Court. Today, my colleagues, by voting in favor of this powerful, just and fair decision of the Parliamentary Assembly to expel Russia, we once again reiterate our full support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. Now the time is priceless. Every minute, innocent children and helpless people become new targets of the aggressor's bullets and bombs. I appreciate this resolute determination of the Assembly and address the Committee of Ministers with confidence that this trait of unity and strength in the Parliamentary Assembly will be carried out into the immediate execution. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Taliasvili. I come now to Mr. Nikos Tonaritis from Cyprus.
Madam Chair, our thoughts, praise, sympathy, solidarity this time are with the people of Ukraine. Cyprus' position is one based on principles in line with European Union and UN decisions. We are clear on this. Aggression is aggression and should be condemned wherever it comes from. As a small European Union member state, Cyprus, 37% of its territory, of which continues to be illegally occupied since the Turkish invasion of 1974, cannot afford neutrality. We are on the side of Ukraine. We are on the side of international legality. It is deplorable that yet again Russia is invading foreign land in blatant violation of international law, human rights, and the rule of law. It has violated the core democratic principles and values of the civilized world. Whoever tries to downplay its significance is in fact undermining the fundamental principles that define international relations and ruining the credibility of our organization and what it stands for. We need to be united, decisive and clear in order to uphold our fundamental values. We cannot accept nor tolerate the invasion of one member state by another. We cannot accept double standards. We also need to ask ourselves if we are willing to allow another member state of the Council of Europe, also a NATO member, and an European Union candidate country depart from agreed positions and collective decisions as regards the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Shouldn't punitive measures also be applied to this case? Dear President, dear colleagues, last but not least, I should like to pay tribute to the plate of the Ukrainian people and express my admiration to their resolve and courage, and reaffirm our determination to end this brutal invasion. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonaritis. I give now the floor, I think online, for Mrs. Blealina Gilameti. I hope that I have pressed it in a correct way. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, it's my first mandate in the Council of Europe, and I never thought that I had to address a speech in such a crucial moment for democracy, for the real life. A 5-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, a mother of 3, a father who left the house by thinking of his family at all the time. They all lost their lives in a powerful bombardment which symbolized the terrible war of Putin against Ukraine. The only member of this family to survive was Sofia, who had to fight with death, without knowing that her brother, her sister and her parents didn't live anymore. This is just a teeny bit of the terrible stories of a war happening at the heart of Europe. The ones who think it is far are wrong, and it shows we have not learned anything from history. Today, 80 years after the World War and 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain, unfortunately, Europe is witnessing crime, violence, bombardments on civilians, whose only dream was to be part of the European family. Dear colleagues, images and pain coming from the bombardment in Ukraine are among those moments that makes us reflect about our lives, about what we do every day. It's a moment of high responsibility every time we take important decisions with our vote, like the decision we are taking today. We should be united, and we should be voted that the Russian Federation should not be a member anymore of the Council of Europe. The war in Ukraine showed that the peace in Europe is too fragile. It showed us how the tears of joy and the wishes of our children's future turns into tears of despair, where death has become the companion of these cold March days under the bombardment rain. As a country that during its history has suffered a lack of freedom, we know perfectly that its price is really high. Unfortunately, time has shown that those who suffer the most are the elderly, children, women. As the country where Mother Teresa was from, a woman that became the symbol of help for the one in need, Albania, though a small country, will stand with preserving life and dignity of human values together with its allies. Today it's the time to make decisions. Hesitation may make violence and extremist politics continue, thus compromising the security of the whole Europe. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other, Mother Teresa said. Therefore, whoever says that is not out war, it's wrong. This is the war of Europe and requires our total engagement for peace to come back again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mrs. Franziska Holp.
Sehr geehrte Frau Vizepräsidentin.
Madam Vice President, dear colleagues. On behalf of the Liechtenstein delegation, I would first of all like to express my deepest regret for what's happening and express my solidarity with the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government. Russia's aggression against Ukraine must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. This military attack is not only a blatant violation of international law, but it also flies in the face of all the values which the Council of Europe stands for. I call on the Russian Federation to immediately cease the armed attack and to demand the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. I am deeply shocked by the reports of systematic and grave violations of international humanitarian law by the Russian armed forces. The lives of civilians and also civilian infrastructure must be protected at all times and safeguarded, including the establishment of humanitarian corridors. War crimes and human rights violations must be prosecuted and perpetrators held accountable in court. My delegation welcomes the unanimous decision taken by the Committee of Ministers to consult the Parliamentary Assembly on the way forward under Article 8 of the Council of Europe Statute. A united and cohesive approach is essential for defending human rights, democracy and the rule of law. The immediate suspension of Russia was a clear and strong response to the military attack by the Russian Federation. The Council of Europe has thus fulfilled its role as guardian of human rights. With the announced withdrawal of Russia from the Council of Europe, a number of questions are being raised, and other questions are going to be raised as well. My delegation would like to say one thing now. It's of paramount importance that we ensure that contact is maintained with the Russian people whose human rights are being violated. We need to keep open dialogue with NGOs as well. Liechtenstein believes in the strength of multilateralism and is strongly committed to it. For this reason, we are always of the opinion that it is more effective to maintain dialogue than to close the door to talks once and for all. However, Russia's continuing aggression against Ukraine and the ongoing blatant violations of the Council of Europe's fundamental values now show that this basic attitude also has its limits. States that protect and respect democracy, the rule of law and human rights have a seat at our table. And for those that do not or no longer have a seat at the table, there should be the possibility of becoming part of this community once again as soon as the values of the Council of Europe are also theirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marcus Wiegel, I call now. He's not in the hemicycle. No? Then he's online. Mr. Marcus Wiegel, online.
Yes.
Okay,
Madam President,
there you are.
as we gathered in this chamber less than 2 months ago, we were still living in what is known as a post-Cold War era. That era started in the early 1990s, and it witnessed the spread of a democracy in previously unfree nations and the tempering of tensions in Europe generally. It was a time when, as a saying has it, hope and history rhymed. To be sure, there were setbacks, as some states broke asunder in animosity, but there were also, on the whole, successful international efforts to reinstall peace. However, that era collapsed 3 weeks ago on February 24th as one Council of Europe member state, Russia, today as we know a former member, brutally invaded another member state, Ukraine. This came after it had amassed some 200,000 troops and hundreds of tanks, aircraft, warships all around Ukraine's borders. This went on at the same time as Russia participated in diplomatic talks and refused to admit their despicable plans to break international law by invading their peaceful democratic neighbor. Today, as we speak, Russian bombs are killing thousands of Ukrainians, leveling their cities to the ground. They target civilian neighborhoods where inhabitants are struggling to survive freezing nights in shelters without food, clean water, and electricity. Hospitals, schools, food stores, nuclear facilities, factories, all are fair game for the intruders. 3 million Ukrainians have managed to flee the country. Millions more are trying. Our hearts are with them, as are with all those thousands of Ukrainians who continue to bravely fight for their freedom. What we see right now seems to be the work of essentially only one man, namely the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. The attack seems to have had neither a clear reason nor a clear purpose, except somehow to restore a grandiose Soviet Union of the past. The whole world is therefore asking itself what went on and what goes on in Putin's head. Dear colleagues, only 3 years ago, the Russian delegation was let back into our assembly with full rights, despite the fact that they had done nothing to deserve this honor. Even though a majority of this assembly seemed to be quite naive, I'm sure that most, if not all, have learned from their mistake. I hope that all do what they can in their parliaments to pressure Russia and countries in support of this invasion by tough economic sanctions, and support Ukraine with arms and other needs. The defense of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters concerns us all. I do wish to conclude on a more uplifting note, and that is that we have seen European countries come together in solidarity in a way nobody could have imagined prior to February 24th. Peace and freedom are, needless to say, the very core of our Council of Europe, and we have it in our power, again, to make hope and history rhyme. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker would be Mrs. Itilda Joinat, but she is not connected. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Becht.
Ruimte om nog een paar belangrijke dingen ook nog te doen. Ja, waar zijn we?
Becht.
Monsieur Becht, demandez s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Becht, could you request the floor, please?
Mr. Papandreou, please.
As that is not going to function at this moment, I now give the floor to Mr. George Papandreou from Greece. George, you have the floor.
On February 24th, this war seemed to be but a bad dream. Yet we woke up to a nightmare that was real, one we believed we would never again see on this continent. The first reaction of many of us was a big why. Why such irrationality, megalomania, brutality, and fratricidal cold-blooded war? Then the why became a big no, a no of indignation, a no to the lies and fake news, a no to the destruction of cities, no to the unimaginable suffering, war crimes, deaths of innocent people, indiscriminate killing of men, women, children, and the elderly, and a strong no to the lunatic mention of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Today, however, here in the Council of Europe, we are asked to firmly cry out a strong yes, a wholehearted yes to the solidarity and assistance to the brave people of Ukraine, women, children, families, and all fighting for their freedom, their homeland, and their livelihoods. And as a Greek, I need mention the ancient and valiant community of Greeks of Mariupol, and a loud yes of welcome to all refugees who seek safe havens in our countries, fleeing from persecution, starvation, and death. And yes, a lesson to us all, to strengthen the fight for democracy, rule of law, human rights, respect of territorial integrity, and peaceful resolution of conflict. And therefore a yes to the clear condemnation of Putin and the expulsion of Russia from the Council of Europe. My country, Greece, was kicked out of the Council of Europe in the 1970s. I was a young refugee, an activist in the resistance. We fought for, we welcomed this decision. This was not a decision against the Greek people. It was a decision against a military dictatorship which imprisoned and tortured any voice of oppression. It was against the rule of the powerful, against totalitarianism. This decision strengthened our struggle for democracy and freedom in the country where the concept of democracy was born. And today's decision is not against the people of Russia. It is against the autocratic, kleptocratic, oppressive regime of Putin. United today, our decision will become a beacon for all fighters for strong democratic institutions around the world. A beacon for those who even today are bravely fighting for a different Russia and Belarusia, one of freedom and human rights and of peaceful cooperation in a wider Europe of democratic values. Already, Russia has been forced to withdraw from the Council under the crushing weight of our voices in this room. A first victory. We feel all as Ukrainians today. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you very much, George. Now, la prochaine oratrice est Madame Jennifer.
The next speaker is Ms. Jennifer de Timmerman from France. You have the floor, Jennifer.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I'd like to start by expressing my solidarity for the Ukrainian people. And also, I'd like to express it to people that were here and are in the front line. In 2019, I think we're naive. We didn't hear the warning sounded by our colleagues. There have been precedents in history, and we weren't able to draw the necessary lessons from them. I personally, at the time, thought that this was the best course of action for us to take for the Russian people who were victim of despotic and decadent power. And they were still able to petition the European Court of Human Rights. But unfortunately, what's the result? even though it's a little bit later in the day and this is not going to change the situation, currently speaking, I would like, however, to pass on my apologies to the Ukrainian people and to everyone who was clearly sighted enough to see what was happening. The Council of Europe was created in the aftermath of the dreadful war, and the hope was to avoid another war. Now, perhaps we're at the end of an illusion. Things are hanging by a thread at the moment, and I think that we are wondering if we're going to be spared by a monster at the moment. And now we can try and take action. We need to be very strong and united. Through this report, it's our duty to be equal to the expectations of the Ukrainian people. And with this in mind, I do think it's important for us to hear what they have to say, what our friends have sounded to us in terms of warnings that we failed to listen to before. And this also includes thinking about a no-fly zone. Now, who would we be as people if we weren't there to listen to our fellow citizens? There are companies sending donations from Flanders to Ukraine. There are mayors that are there are mothers welcoming Ukrainian families in their homes, and I have no doubt that there are similar expectations. A well-known Russian writer said that the government is a meeting of men that are just creating violence to other men. And this is something that's currently happening in Russia. Let's not forget the opponents to Putin. Perhaps through them, light may come back. What we're going to be voting on today is simply a smaller part that we're playing, but this is a small part we're playing against barbarism, and this part can turn into building a house. Tomorrow we'll be rebuilding, and we need to provide our unwavering support to Ukraine and try and stop this violence from unfurling. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Olivier Best from France. Olivier, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, President. The brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia marks the return of war in Europe. We thought with the fall of the Berlin Wall that we would enjoy the dividends of peace, but history reminds us brutally that we're all Ukrainians. Given this armed aggression of one member state of the Council of Europe by another, there is only one solution: to expel the aggressor. For several years ago, I defended the keeping of Russia in our organization because I thought that the Putin regime might, and the speaker is now frozen because he's speaking from an unsuitable place. And I have to see that Russia has taken a course in the opposite direction. But while the exclusion of Russia is today inevitable, we should specify that this is Vladimir Putin's Russia, because no one in power is immortal. And I hope that the Russian people will one day find the strength to put at its head a leader who will again espouse our common values. Russia should know that it may resume its seat and its rank in this great European family if that happens. And we also need to make sure our organization ponders upon its own evolution. Fundamental values are but the pillars of the temple. To remain standing, those values need the cement of tangible cooperation, allowing for shared prosperity. That is the course plotted by the Founding Fathers in 1950, in inviting all states to come together in a drive to create the conditions for common prosperity. The Council of Europe will not survive without evolving in the same way. The Paris Climate Agreements are leading us towards a fossil fuel-free society by 2030, and we can only hope to see peace in Europe if we involve each state in determining the economic development and well-being of our populations. I therefore hope we will work to ensure that the conditions are in place which will allow, again, the speaker has frozen.
Now we are losing you, Olivier. So sorry, the connection has gone. Dear colleagues, we now come to our last speaker on our list. It's Maria Jefreva-Skuratovsky from Estonia. Maria, you have the floor.
Honourable President, members, I would like to start my speech with pointing out one simple fact. The Russian Federation's actions against Ukraine is a war that brings destruction, heartbreak and losses and death of civilians and innocent children. This war started already 8 years ago, and the aggressor has never taken responsibility for its actions. Let's name things as they are. The Assembly has always played the role of Europe's guardian of human rights and democracy. Defense and promotion of democratic security and freedom lay on our shoulders. And these values are more than ever needed right now. If we do not act right now, Russia's aggression against Ukraine will have global and long-term negative consequences that challenge the rules-based international order as we know it. We have witnessed many times how Russia ignores its obligations set up in the European Convention on Human Rights. Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, annexation of Crimea 2014, poisoning of Alexei Navalny. This list can be continued endlessly. PAÍS needs to proceed with the steps necessary to expel Russia from the Council of Europe. Therefore, every legal avenue available must be used to hold the aggressor to account. We have to wake up before it is too late. Estonia welcomes the fast reaction of the Council of Europe to Russia's aggression when Russia's right of representation in the organization was suspended. I would also like to stress that yesterday the Parliament of Estonia adopted a declaration that calls on the United Nations member states to take immediate steps to establish a non-fly zone in order to prevent massive civilian casualties in Ukraine. We admire the astonishing courage of all Ukrainian people, and we stand by Ukrainian not just with words but with concrete actions. Dear colleagues, Russia has brought war back to Europe. Millions of people have lost their homes and their loved ones. People are sheltering in underground stations and basements, crying and hoping for peace. These nightmares are happening because President of Russian Federation Putin decided that Russia's neighboring country, Ukraine, has no right to exist. There is not and will not be a place for the aggressor in this value-based organization. We need to send this strong message. Slava Ukraini, Geroyam Slava!
Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.
Maria, dear colleagues, we have now come to the end of the speakers list. May I first thank the Secretary General of the Assembly, and in particular the Table Office, that they were able to accommodate all of you. More than half of the members of the Assembly have taken the floor in this extraordinary session. That is a record, but it is thanks to our great secretariat that we were able to accommodate all of you. And I also want to thank the interpreters for giving us the chance to continue the debate until now. And I want to thank all of you for your very disciplined way. Nobody stole speaking time of others, so in the end you all could take the floor. Now I call Madam Skau, the rapporteur, to reply to all the remarks that you made. I give you the next 10 hours, Ingrid. No, but feel free, but you know, speaking time is limited.
President and dear colleagues, I thank you for this debate, for your dedication to and respect for the seriousness of the question we have had to deliberate. We are in an unimaginable situation with a war raging in the midst of Europe. The suffering is terrible and the needs are enormous. As an Assembly, we have consistently supported dialogue, but this aggression is a point of no return. There is no room for an aggressor in European home. I have listened carefully to all your important comments, but I hope you understand that with such a high number of speakers, it is not possible for me to respond to your all. All of your perspective presented here today merits attention and dedication. If not included in this text, we should keep them in mind and make sure to follow up on the needs and initiative they represent. Some of you mentioned the importance of reaching out to the Russian people, many of whom who do not support this war and do not have access to independent and objective information about it. I agree. We should find ways to offer a platform to all those Russians who share the Council of Europe values and to those who bravely protest the war. The text in front of you is strong, and it has a clear message to the Committee of Ministers. I sincerely hope it can be supported unanimously by all 46 delegations participating here today. History will bear in witness to the truth that it was this Assembly, through these actions here this week, that told Russia that it no longer belongs here. I encourage you all to vote in favour, to make it a unanimous decision. As I said in my introduction, a united Council of Europe is stronger Council of Europe. In this extraordinary situation, European unity is important. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Rapporteur. Does the chairperson of the committee who wants to speak? Mr. Kiljunen, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First, I want to thank the rapporteur for preparing the report. Ingrid, you made very good, balanced and consensus-driven report, and all of us. Thank you very much for this one. We show strong solidarity for Ukraine and Ukrainians for their fighting not only for their sovereignty and national existence, but also for the universal values of democracy, human rights and rule of law. This aggression is condemned by almost the whole world. Our citizens have taken onto the streets to protest, but also thousands of Russians have been very courageous in manifesting their opposition. Mr. President, I underline that this opinion paper was unanimously supported, approved by the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. One voice was there, and I hope there will be one voice from here too. It's time to send a strong message to Ukraine, to Russia and to the Committee of Ministers what is our opinion in this regard. Mr. President, you know that I am a man of dialogue, but now we are now in the situation that there is only one option. With this existing leadership and policy, the Russian Federation is not eligible to be a member of the Council of Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kiljunen. The debate is closed. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft opinion which you find in document 15477, to which 20 amendments and 2 sub-amendments have been tabled. I remind the Assembly that the speaking time on amendments will be 30 seconds. I understand that the Vice Chairperson of the Political Affairs Committee has proposed that the Assembly that the amendments 9, 6, 1 and 13 to the draft opinion, which were unanimously adopted by the committee, should be declared as agreed. That's okay? That's all right? So, Kimo, yes? As there is no objection, I declare the amendments 9, 6, 1 and 13 to the draft opinion have been agreed. I now call Madam Vashilenko to support amendment number 5. You have 30 seconds, Madam.
Thank you. And this amendment essentially concerns the proper sequence of events. The aggression of the Russian Federation started not 20 days ago, but 8 years ago, on the 20th February 2014. And essentially this is how the report should start, that in continuation of the war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation against Ukraine since 20th February 2014, as of 24th of February 2022, the Russian Federation started all the atrocities that we are witnessing now. This is what this amendment is about. I ask to support. Thank you.
Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the committee? Good. Committee is in favour. I now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is carried. I now call Mr. Zingris to support amendment number 17. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, dear Chairman. My amendment related to solidarity to those courageous members of Parliament, of Ukrainian Parliament, who are with us together. So the name is, the Assembly stands in solidarity with its Ukrainian members in those dark hours. And I would like to add, I see the children who just came during the last 3 days, and we are welcoming the children of your families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zingris. Does anybody wants to speak against the amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the committee?
Majority.
Committee is in favor. I now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Closed. The vote is closed. Call for the amendments to be displayed, for the results to be displayed. The amendment is carried. Amendment number 9 was unanimously adopted. Amendment number 6 was unanimously adopted. We now come to amendment 18 with a sub-amendment. I first call Mr. Omtzigt to support amendment number 18. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very important that the crimes which are at the moment being committed in Ukraine are prosecuted. So if your house is being destroyed, if your loved ones are being killed, there should be a tribunal. Now, the International Criminal Court rests on the Treaty of Rome, and Russia has not ratified that treaty. By the way, Ukraine has signed it but not ratified it, so I hope they'll do so soon. So it would be very good to see how we can implement independent tribunal to do this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omtzigt. I call Madam Scout to support sub-amendment number 1 on behalf of the Political Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a sub-amendment 1 to amendment 18. This sub-amendment is very important. The Assembly should look into the possible settings up of an international criminal tribunal, but the issue must be analysed better. We shall come back to this question in April. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak against this sub-amendment? Do not see any. I understand that the mover of the main amendment agrees. The committee is in yes. The
committee is in favour, unanimously supporting the sub-amendment, but also position an amendment as sub-amended, also unanimous.
Thank you very much. I now shall put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please have the results displayed. The sub-amendment is carried. I now will put the main amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I ask the results to be displayed. Amendment 18 as amended has been adopted. We come now to amendment number 2 with a sub-amendment. I first call Mr. Kolatian to support amendment number 2. You have 30 seconds.
Mr. President, as a matter of fact, this initial amendment was approved unanimously, but it's true that the rapporteur also proposed a sub-amendment that also it was approved unanimously. So it's just a factual indication about the real figure of the refugees that came in my country, and not necessarily on behalf of the rapporteur, but also for the Republic of Moldova. It was approved unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kolatian. Anyone who wants to speak against this amendment? Oh no, first I have to ask Madam Scow to present sub-amendment number 2 on behalf of the Political Affairs Committee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Sub-amendment 1 to amendment 2. This sub-amendment aims at correcting factual information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Scow. As the mover agrees, as she indicated, we now shall put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Can we please see the results? The sub-amendment is carried. We now will vote on the main amendment as amended. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please let us see the results. The amendment as amended is agreed, and I apologize that I did not ask the chair of the committee, but I had the idea that it was good to have his approval as well. Now we come to amendment number 15. I understand that Mr. Katrougalos or Mr. Jallo wants to withdraw amendment number 15. Does anybody else wish to move it? That is not the case, so amendment number 15 is withdrawn. We now come to oral amendment number 1. I have received an oral amendment from the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy, which reads as follows. Replace paragraph 13(8) with the following paragraph. I read it. Immediately release and reinstate all kidnapped mayors and local representatives, as well as release activists. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets criteria under Rule 34(7)(a). Is there any opinion or opposition against this debate to be debated? Not the case. Therefore, we proceed to the next amendment. No. Therefore, I call Madam Scow to support oral amendment number 1. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. It's oral amendment to paragraph 13.8. The aim of the oral amendment is to ask to release and restate all kidnapped mayors and local authorities and free activists without making names to cover all those who may be in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Scow. The committee is obviously in favor. Thank you very much. Then I shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May I see the results to be displayed? The oral amendment is adopted. We now come to amendment number 3. I call Mrs. Chope to support amendment number 3. You have 30 seconds.
Mr. President, may I make a short statement about amendments 3, 12, 7 and 4 to paragraph 14. At the Political Affairs Committee this morning, there was an audible intake of breath and incomprehension when amendments 3, 12, 7 and 4 to paragraph 14 of the opinion were opposed by the rapporteur. Since then, I am very pleased to say that there have been discussions with the rapporteur and the leaders of political groups to find a constructive way forward so we can speak with one voice. The outcome is an agreement that Amendments 3 and 4 be withdrawn, but that Amendments 12 and 7, which cover similar ground, will be supported by the rapporteur and hopefully by the full Assembly. On that understanding, may I thank everybody involved in these constructive discussions and ask leave to withdraw Amendment 3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Job. Amendment 3 is withdrawn. Does anybody else wish to move the amendment? That is not the case. Then we now come on amendment number 12. I call Mrs. Ingres to support amendment number 12. You have 30 seconds.
Sir, amendment number 12, based on broader coalition, just the same line like Mr. Chop said. After a long discussion, amendment number 12 means leave humanitarian assistance and to have their assistance, simple to have assistance to Ukraine. So I'm just asking you to support from my heart. Well, that's very important to assist Ukraine. Thank you so much, and thank you for much for all members of who just was involved in discussion.
Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
The opinion of the committee, originally we rejected it with a narrow majority, but taking into consideration the discussion what have been now done, there seems to be a consensus behind this one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kiljunen. I now will put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. I call for, the vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is adopted. I call amendment number 7 is withdrawn. Is there anybody else who wants to?
No, 7 is accepted.
Sorry.
7 is accepted.
Amendment 7 is not withdrawn. This is because this British language of Christopher is not always clear to me. So, Christopher, please move your amendment.
Mr. President, I'm delighted to be able to move amendment number 7. This is all about enabling greater assistance to be given to Ukraine, and particularly control over Ukrainian airspace, which is of fundamental importance in this war. And that's why we in the United Kingdom delegation, and I know our Ukrainian colleagues, feel that this is a really important amendment, and I hope that the rest of the Assembly will agree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Job. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the committee?
It was rejected by narrow majority originally. Now it seems to be a consensus.
Thank you very much. I now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. Amendment 7 is carried. I now come to amendment number 16. I call on Mr. Jello to support amendment number 16. You have 30 seconds.
If you remember, we withdrew Amendment 15 after a conversation that we've had to try to, in the spirit of consensus, try to reduce the amount of amendments. So I'm calling on each and every one of you to vote in favor of Amendment 16. As I said in my speech, this is real, and it's important that we, everybody have access to safety and to a safe place, and to have seek asylum, and seek, if they seek refuge, to have a possibility to be able to have refuge. This is about non-discrimination, it's about equal treatment, and I hope you support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Not the case. What is the opinion of the committee?
Approved by large majority.
Thank you very much. We now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Can I ask for the results to be displayed? The amendment is carried. I now come to amendment number 4, but that is withdrawn. Is there anybody else who wants to move it? Not the case. We come now to amendment number 8. I call on Mr. Daams to support amendment number 8. You have 30 seconds.
Colleagues, today we will take a very important decision, but then there is tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. This terrible situation will not go away on the short term. Let's hope that we can do more. I do believe that much is done, and I commend the President, the Secretary General of the Committee of Ministers for doing so, but I do believe that we should look into trying to do more than we do today. Paragraph 15 only invites the Human Rights Commissioner and the Special Representative on Refugees. We should set up a task force to look into whatever more we can do 24/7 and act. Words matter, acts matter more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daams. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Schwaber, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very sorry, but I cannot support this amendment. I ask you to follow the position of the rapporteur and of the committee, because I think we should not create a kind of body we don't know yet what it should stand for, what it should be. Let's evaluate it, elaborate it in the presidential committee, maybe, but I think, and come back maybe in April to this, but just to decide it very fast, not knowing what it is, we should not do so. So I ask you to vote against this amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schwab. Was this the opinion of the committee?
Rejected.
The committee rejected it. I now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Yes, some 2 sentences. Sure, but they cannot. Vote is closed. May I have the results to be displayed? The amendment is rejected. I now come to amendment number 20. I call Mr. Omtzigt to support amendment number 20. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. If your house is destroyed or your human rights are not being upheld, then you can go to your local court and in the end up at the Strasbourg court here for human rights. And then you can sue your own nation. Well, if your nation is occupied, then the country that has effective control is the one you can sue. But it will be very tedious for Ukrainian citizens to first go to the Russian courts and then come to Strasbourg 10 years later. So this amendment proposes that they can go directly to the Strasbourg court.
Does anybody, thank you very much, Mr. Omtzigt, does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the committee?
Approved by a large majority.
Thank you very much. I now will put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May I have the results to be displayed? The amendment is adopted. We now come to amendment number 10. I call Mr. Zinger's report. Amendment number 10, you have 30 seconds.
Yes, well, the amendment was just modified by all of you, and it was before projected the same amendment by dear friend Peter Opsnik, so I should withdraw this amendment. Well, it's logistically it's the same to establish international tribunal, but if we agree to do that in time after some very short time, so let's not vote for that. I would like to withdraw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zingras. He withdraws his amendment. Does anybody else wish to move it? That is not the case. Amendment 11 has fallen because oral amendment number 1 is adopted. Amendment number 1 was unanimously adopted. I understand that amendment 19, that Mr. Omsik wishes to withdraw amendment 19. Is that correct? Yes. Does anybody else wishes to move it? Not the case. Withdrawn. I now call Mrs. Andrikiene to support amendment number 14. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Paragraph 20, the very first sentence, I propose to add immediately. So the sentence will read the following way. The Assembly, therefore, is of the opinion that the Committee of Ministers should request the Russian Federation to withdraw from the Council of Europe immediately. Thank you
very much. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? It's not the case. What is the opinion of the committee?
Approved.
Committee is in favor. I now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. May I ask, the vote is closed. May I ask for the results to be displayed? The amendment is carried. As amendment number 13 was unanimously adopted, we now come to the vote on the draft opinion. And I inform the Assembly that a 2/3 majority is required. We will now proceed to vote on the draft opinion as amended. The vote in hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. May I ask for the results to be displayed? The opinion is unanimously adopted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We now come to the end of the session. May I make a final remark to say that we are, of course, sad that we today had to ask to expel a member of our organization, which has been a member for over 25 years. But I'm glad that we dared to do it. It is clear, if you cross red lines, then there is no place for you in this organization. I'm very pleased that during these 2 days, our assembly functioned not as an arena where we confronted each other with our differences, but we functioned as an agora, and the unanimous vote in the end proved that. I'm grateful to the Committee of Ministers and to the Secretary General for the effective cooperation, which made it possible that this time, after a blatant violation of the statute, we could act, and we could act in synergy. Tomorrow, I will address the Committee of Ministers and inform them about our unanimous position and our expectations, and I'm confident that they will react in an appropriate way. Before going home, I want, of course, to thank Madam Skau, Mr. Howell and Madam Tries for supporting us, especially the interpreters, because they did a great job and it made far more time than they were obliged to. And at the very end, I hope that I can wish well to all the members of the Ukrainian delegation. Please stay safe, please stay sound. Be aware that this assembly is now with you. Thank you very much. The session is closed.
Thank you. Both of you were incredible. I sent some people.
I calculated the seconds.
Once in a while, we understand that.
I was exposed to this.